Everybody, thank you for joining us this Sunday evening with Greg Krupinski, who is one of our partners and a big avid user of the platform. And we're happy to have him on tonight to talk about some charts and just kind of look at the overall markets really into the end of the year and into next year. So, Greg, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. As always, we're going to go through the quick disclaimer, just going over, anything that we're reviewing or kind of analyzing tonight is not a buy or sell or advising signal, anything like that. This is really a way to highlight some of the features on TrendSpider. I'll be going over some particular features that I've really been using lately and that we're really starting to kind of see some reversals in the market possibly, and these features have really helped with that. So that doesn't mean that this is advice or anything like that, just something that we're kind of showing our own opinion as well as showing how the system is working. So our vision at TrendSpider, for those that have not been on one of these webinars before, the first thing is really to innovate both the process and the mindset of technical analysis. So, innovate the way that you're drawing trend lines, innovate the way that you're testing for a particular set of conditions, or, really just thinking about technical analysis as a whole and visualizing how volume and price move, such as with the raindrops. And then the end goal is to be really the most fully integrated, all-in-one trading and technical analysis platform out there for both retail and professional traders in the world. So some of the main functions that really make us unique are our back testing engine, automated technical analysis features such as our auto fibs and our auto trends, proprietary indicators such as the anchored VWAP from Brian Shannon, founder of Alpha Trends, the multi-time frame analysis, something that I mentioned earlier, that's something that I'm going to really be focusing on tonight, and the ability to create alerts on any of these levels that I just mentioned, either that's a trend line, a moving average, and then innovating the way to visualize how volume and price are reacting and how volume is flowing throughout a particular period of time with our raindrops. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Greg, and thank you so much again for joining.
Hey, no problem. Thanks again for having me. Good evening, everybody. So my name is Greg Krupinski. I am not a full-time trader. I have a full-time job. I work in healthcare finance, but trading and stock investing is always something I've been passionate about, and I love doing it. I've been more of a technical analysis now for probably about 10 years. I used to be more of a fundamental kind of guy. I'm a CPA. But once I discover the charts, I'm hooked. I think just the way that the charts present the risk reward levels, and most importantly, when you look at a chart, when you get out. And I think that's something that's so crucial to trading. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to go through maybe 10 or so names that I'm looking at for next week, some setups that I like, share those. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And then I'm going to go into some themes, kind of big picture themes I'm looking at coming into the new year. So I will go ahead and get started here. Let me share my screen. All right, sorry for the delay, guys. Looks like it's pulling up.
Perfect.
And Alex, I see your question out there. How often do I update my gktrading.net website? The answer is not as often as I'd like. I stay much more current on Twitter and StockTwits, posting charts of interest, but I don't update the website as frequently as I like. Sometimes I'll get going on a roll and I'll put a bunch of videos out, then I won't update it for a while. But I stay much more current on Twitter and answer questions, share charts, things like that.
All right, I can see your screen now. Beautiful.
All right, great. Okay, so the first chart here is Eli Lilly, and this is actually one that I traded last week and I still have a position in. And I wanted to highlight here how I use the volume by price. So I'll just go ahead and show. This is the daily chart, just the 200-day moving average there in blue. So I really love this feature in TrendSpider where you can anchor the volume by price to a certain point. So I'll go ahead and pull it up. So I usually anchor it to a recent high or recent low, or some kind of point of inflection, earnings gap or something like that. So for Lilly here, it made its high March 26th, it looks like. So I'll go ahead and anchor the price to there. And then this shows the volume by price here. So this is basically how many shares trade at these different price levels. So what I look for here is when these line up with more traditional, horizontal support and resistance levels. So you can see right here, this big price bar, this is where the most shares have traded. And this is also where a spot that's acted as resistance in the past. You can see it here and here and here. It's been resistance, and then it finally broke out. So it kind of got my attention there. And then what really got my attention is the lack of volume. Once it got past this 118, there hasn't been many shares traded up there.
Yep.
So it made this nice little consolidation right here. This was back, let's see, November 25th, had a couple days, came back into that 116 level, then started firing up. So I got a long common stock, and I bought a few options of it too. And I sold those on Friday, but I still have my stock position because it's looking really strong here. So this is just something I wanted to highlight. Not one I think is actionable, Monday or Tuesday. At this point, maybe if it comes back down to 118, but I just wanted to show how I use that volume by price.
Yeah, that's something that we recently introduced too. So if anyone hasn't kind of played around with it yet, it's definitely something that you can find easily on the indicators list.
For sure. I think it's a great addition.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's one that I did just to kind of highlight. So here's some things I'm looking at for next week. First one is Starbucks. I really like the recent action in this. I almost bought it Friday, but I held off. But I like it. Just had this huge run here from May, all the way through July, and then it's just been kind of sagging. But then it came back here, hit this 200-day, and it's starting to show some strength. So what I'm looking for here is for it to kind of break out of this consolidation, decide it wants to go higher. And I did this the last time I was on one of these TrendSpider shows. These alerts, as I mentioned, I have a full-time job, so I'm not going to be able to watch this all day. So I create alerts right there. I want to get alerted if this breaks through, this 80, we'll call it 8650-ish level. You could use the sensitivity there, and I'll want to be alerted, we'll say 10 days. So if this one starts moving up, I'll get the alert texted to my phone, and if I'm free, I can pull up the chart, and if it's looking good, give it one last look and just pull the trigger. So Starbucks is one. If it could just start creeping up, maybe 8650, that's one on my long list for next week. Next one here. Oh, go ahead, Jake. Somebody have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious for Starbucks. If you went back to Starbucks, I'm just curious for like that hammer that formed in May. If we anchored volume by price from that point, I'm just curious where kind of the point of control there is. Where's most? Okay, so we're kind of right at that area where the most
right here, huh?
Holding. Yeah. So if we break out of that area, yeah, I like because that was kind of the next leg up. So that's where I sometimes like to anchor from that next kind of stair step, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can see right here this big volume bar, which is highlighted in that kind of pinkish color, $84. You could see that's where it hesitated there before breaking higher. It acted as support there, it acted as kind of resistance here, then it turned back support here. So that's obviously a big level. So if I enter it, that's probably where my stop would be around. It's also right around the 200-day too. So. All right, next one is Goldman Sachs. Banks have just been on fire. If you look at XLF, it's sitting right there at those all-time highs. So banks, if they continue to be an area of strength, definitely something to look at. But this has a really obvious area here. You can see this, 224, 225, resistance, and it kind of just peaked above it Friday. Had a big move from 211, 224. So maybe it needs to settle a little at the beginning of the week. Maybe not. You never know. But this is definitely one if it's trading over 225, I'm going to want to be long Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, that one is. I mean, you kind of have that ascending, triangle there too.
Yeah, it does. You can see it starting higher lows. Some right here, right here, right here. Really nice look to it.
Very cool. Do you follow XLF much, or just kind of the individuals?
Both. Yeah, XLF is it. Oops. The one thing I was noting with XLF this week, and obviously it had the huge move Friday. It's got that big gap there from 30 to 30.25 or so.
Yep.
But if you pull up like the monthly,
ooh, that looks good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see it's just right there. 31.20. Yeah, it's almost like a little cup with a little handle. It looks really good. So we'll see what happens. Nothing's guaranteed, but that sure is a nice looking sector.
So we have a question. I see you use 25 for volume by price. Why 25? Are you mentioning 25 columns maybe?
So I think that was the one that we did it from Starbucks. Was that?
Yeah, I think they're asking about the number of columns. Like, why don't you use 50 or 10? Why?
Oh, gotcha. I just like the way that looks, to be honest. I just think it fits the charts nice for my time frame. But there's no rhyme or reason to it. If you get the thicker ones, it kind of tells you the same information. But I just like how this fits the charts.
Yep. It's easier to kind of see those volume blocks or volume shelves above if you have more columns or bars to kind of go off of. Kind of makes everything a little more detailed, if you will.
Yep. This is one I normally don't like to trade things and define downtrends, but this one I just can't ignore. CGC, you could see, $53 down to 14, and it just had this huge bottom, all this volume coming in. So I'm actually going to flip to the hourly chart here. It's, again, this isn't a downtrend, guys. If it gets below $18, I don't want any part of it. But I just love how tight this is getting you could see November 21st, now it hasn't really done anything. And it just looks like it's ready to make a really big move. I don't know if it's going to be up or down, but I feel like when this thing starts moving, it's going to move. So this one is on my list for next week to keep an eye on.
Beautiful. Yeah, and you got Drake now invested in CGC, so why wouldn't you be bullish?
Yeah, there you go.
I think he's like an owner now or something. I think that
isn't that what started popping it here? That news?
I think that's what the pump started from him becoming an owner. I forgot exactly what he's doing, but yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if that was, if that was kind of the next thing that kind of changes the trend, if you will, because that's a pretty strong 3 move up after that gap down.
Sure is. 14 all the way up to 21, that huge volume. So yeah. Yep, it could very well continue the downtrend, but if it doesn't, it could make an aggressive move. Maybe the next level I'd look at here, maybe 23 or so.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that big volume block too. I mean when it moved up, that volume block was really at like 18 to 20. That tall one.
Oh yeah.
So, or 1850 to like 2160. All right, so we got a couple more questions here. Why do you choose the stocks but not others? ABTR, VICE, XL, and X on its way up. I think there's just so many stocks out there. You can't find every single one. Greg, I'll let you answer too, but I would say, you stick to the few that you understand the personality of the stock and you kind of just follow that over and over.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, especially if they're the same industry. Like I'm going to go over a lot of metals and steel stocks. There's so many that are looking good. So if there's so many in a certain industry that are looking good, sometimes I think it's easier just to go with the ETF. You kind of get rid of some of that company specific risk and earnings and all that if the whole industry is moving. But if not, like you said, you pick a few that you like how they trade, and you're comfortable with them, and they're at the spots that you're watching, and just focus on those. There's so many out there; you can't have them all on your radar.
Yep. Just becomes inefficient at that point.
All right, IGT. This is one here that had this huge gap up November 14th. You could see just that bar, 1375 all the way up to 16. And then over time, it's just kind of given most of that back, but it's stabilizing here. So this is one too. I don't have to pull up the volume by price to tell you there's been a lot of volume here and right below the current price. I'll go ahead and do it so we can see. I'll do it off the lows there. But you can just see there's a ton of volume traded right around the current price. So this one has my eye. If I was to get long this one next week, I know exactly where my stop would be. It'd be like, 1375-ish, just below this current level. So the risk reward is pretty good. It does have the problem with this, it has had some gap down, so some potential resistance. But I just wanted to pull this one up because I like the potential, that huge gap up. It's over the 200-day now. And we have a nice risk reward spot here against that area, just under $14. So that's one I'll keep my eye on early this week and just kind of see how it's acting.
Sweet. So the 200 is mostly your kind of go-to as far as looking for support or resistance?
I use the 200. I also use some shorter term ones. You can see over here on my screen, I have 21 and 13. Sometimes I'll turn them on, turn them off. I use a 50-day or 55 as well. But to be honest, Jiggy, usually I just use the 200 to kind of more visualize the longer term trend. A lot of times I'll just turn all the indicators off with the charts and just look simply at price action. But I do use the indicators too. I'm not just always look at without the indicators, but I do use the 200 all the time. And sometimes I'll use the shorter moving averages.
Makes sense.
And as far as the moving averages acting as support or resistance, I think a lot of that is stock specific. If you pull up a 50-day moving average, sometimes a stock could care less about it. You'll see it just chop around it. But then sometimes you'll pull up a different stock and you'll see the 50-day moving average, acting as support or resistance. So I think it's kind of hard with a moving average to just put a blanket statement that it's always going to act as support or resistance. I kind of make it prove it for that specific stock or ETF. And if it has acted as support or resistance in the past, I'll use it that way.
So we have a question. How do you set target or the long positions? Is that what you just answered or no? Sorry.
How do I set targets?
Yeah, we have a question from Matt.
Okay.
Exit criteria. Are those something that you're like looking for a cross on the moving average, or do you use any lower indicators, or is it mostly upper indicators?
I'll use MACD and RSI occasionally, but I usually have them turned off when I'm going through charts.
Yeah.
Especially if you look at enough charts, you can kind of get a feel just by looking at price action. You kind of know what the indicator is going to do.
Yeah.
I'll go through an example of that in a little bit with oil stock. But as far as targets go, selling is definitely harder than buying. It's easy for me and a bunch of other people to pull up a chart and say, I like it long over this level, and you know where to set your stop. But then once you're in the trade, managing it, that's by far the hardest part. That's way harder than buying and selling stocks at good spots. What I found that works for me is this one here, say SYNF. I really like this chart. You can see this level, $56 or so. Acted as resistance a couple times here. Slight dip. I like that slight dip. It's kind of like the handle in a cup and handle. Didn't want to come all the way back down to here, so buyers are getting a little more aggressive. That's usually the sign of a breakout to come. Not always, but often. So if I were to buy this, you can set targets. The measured move here, if you consider this a cup and handle, not someone considered a valid cup and handle, someone, but it'd be, this 47.50, 55.50. So that's an $8 move based on the size of the top to the bottom there. But what I do is I'll enter a full position, which is I never risk more than 0.5% or 1% on any given trade. So I can determine my position size based off of how much I'm willing to risk in the trade. And then if the trade is working well, say it's up, 5 to 7% in the first, week or two, I usually take half of it. I like to sell half of my position if it's working. And it just works for me because then it lets the rest of the position, I can kind of follow the trend, and I'm not as anxious. If it goes back down and takes dips, I'm not as worried about it. So I get my size cut in half, and then I'll just follow the longer term trend, and I'll base that more on trend lines. If it starts dipping, there's not really one here, but I'll look at the trend lines, and then I'll look for it to make a lower high, and then that's where I might want to think about exiting the rest of the position. But it's important for me to take those gains right away when I can get them, because it just makes it turns the rest of the trade into more of a trend trade. Does that make sense?
Perfect.
So here's one I like here. Another one is Lamar. This one you can see it already broke out, but it's not too far extended. You can see this area right here. There's resistance here, and Friday had that really nice move out of a nice base here. So this one I really like over $85 or so.
Is that is that a biotech?
That's a advertising company. I think billboards mostly.
Advertising, huh? Interesting. Nice. Yeah, another beautiful ascending triangle breakout there.
Yep, love those.
To be like the quarter of ascending triangle breakouts. This XBI had a beautiful one a few weeks back. It just seems like the market is definitely starting to break out here. As much as some of the charts that I'll show today look a little more on the bearish side, I mean, at this point, interest rates are so low, and I've mentioned this before, but would love your opinion on it, Greg. But there's really nowhere else to put your money right now. So the market is kind of the place to put it, especially when we're possibly talking about lowering rates.
Yeah, I mean, it keeps going up.
Yep.
Too many people surprised, but you can't fight it. Just got to take advantage of it while you can.
Yep. No, it seems like just everywhere you look. I mean, Google is really looking strong as well for a breakout. I think you're going to mention that one as well.
Yep. I have a weekly chart on that one. A couple more. I can go through some of these pretty quick because they're the same idea. Most of these charts, you can see BSNX was in this range forever from 40 to 44, broke down, and now it's back above it. So I really like it, above that $43 level. Really nice looking chart there, Boston Scientific.
Beautiful.
FLT, this one broke out a little bit, and it's right back, kind of retesting its breakout area. 305, you can see it was resistance here, and it's just consolidating right there. So if this one starts moving, had a nice day Friday. So if we can get some continuation, I would enter this trade and put my stop, 301, just under that yellow area. But I like that chart quite a bit too. I don't like this candle here, but I'd be willing to overlook it with that risk reward presented here. All right, one more daily chart. This is a ABTX. And again, same idea here. Here's the level. $36, resistance, peaked over it Friday. So if we can get some continuation, something I'd be looking to get long next week. Like you mentioned, the ascending triangle too, keeps making these higher lows, hitting resistance at 36, and then it broke through. So I like that one.
We have another question. Do you normally open a buy position after the breakout, or are you anticipating it and then you're selling into the breakout?
Great question. Usually I enter after the breakout. I'll let it decide if it's going to stay there. I enter most of my trades towards the end of the day, before market close. So if it's still holding the breakout level, if it's not too far extended, I'll look to enter a long position. But sometimes, let's find one of these here. If there's a slight dip, like here, and they had this hammer candle here on November 18th, and I kind of see it bumping up against this level, but not breaking out yet. I might enter it here with a stop below that day's lows to minimize my risk in anticipation of a breakout. I do that on occasion, but typically I'll wait for the breakout. When I don't wait for the breakout, my stop will be tighter. It'll usually be beneath that daily low that I enter the trade. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. It was from the chat, but yes, they said yes.
Thanks for calling out, because I don't have the chat pulled up, so that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's look at some weekly charts here. First one's GE. Actually, I'll pull up the daily here too. So GE on Friday kind of started bouncing off this level here about 1060. I'll highlight it. So this looks like an interesting area to me. You can see here it was the high, broke out, and it retested it. So if you have a desire to get long GE, I think this is not a bad spot to enter it here. With a stop, I'd put mine about 1065, 1070. But I really wanted to pull up the weekly chart, because you can see, and this is what I look at sometimes, it's kind of changing the structure. Obviously, it's been a dog for years. It's kind of bounced around. But lately here, see it made this big low here. This is December of 18. Came all the way back up to 12. This is that same highlighted spot. Then it made a higher low, but now it made a higher high. So the structure might be changing. It might be entering a new uptrend. And if that's the case, this again would be a really nice spot to get in on that for a longer term trade here in GE. And then you mentioned Google. I mean, this thing on the weekly chart here this looks great. I like this look a lot. You can see this textbook breakout just under 1300. Resistance, broke out, came back for a quick retest, and then last week, really strong action, closing at what I believe is all-time highs, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so Google looks really strong.
We have another question. Are you waiting for a pattern to appear first, or jump in the candle on the first breakout line? So I think you mentioned it a little bit, but I guess the main question here is, like, right when it breaks out, are you buying, or are you kind of waiting to see if it's a fake out first? Or
usually I'll be buying. Like I said, I like to usually wait for the end of the day and make sure it holds that breakout level. If it does, I'm usually going to be a buyer, but I'm not going to lie, I'll miss a lot of trades because I work full time, so sometimes I'll just miss them. But I've come to realize that it really doesn't matter if it's going to be a good trade and you miss out on 1%. It's not that big a deal. If I miss it the day it breaks out, if I catch it the next day or in 2 days, it doesn't make that much of a difference for my time frame. If I'm looking to trade something, if I like to, book swing games in a couple weeks and then hold that remaining position for, as long as it's trending up. Usually, if I miss it by a day or two, it doesn't make that big a difference. But to answer the question, I'll usually wait to the end of the day and want to see it hold that level if it's a daily breakout.
Makes sense.
All right. So one thing I wanted to cover is some big themes I'm seeing. This is the time of year everybody starts looking at what's ahead next year, review last year. So I think one of the things that I'm noticing the most that has my attention coming into next year, I'm not saying it's going to work or not work, but are kind of commodities. Like I have like three groups here. I look at like hard stuff, steel, dirty stuff, oil, and stuff you can eat, some commodities. So I'm going to go through a few of those charts real quick, longer term charts, and kind of show you what I'm looking at. So first is XME. This is the S&P Metals and Mining ETF, and this is the highest weighting in this ETF is CDE. It's like 6.5%. So it has a lot of steel names, a lot of mining names. Pretty balanced. There's not a lot of names with really heavy allocations. It's just a really balanced metals and mining ETF. So I like this one quite a bit. And you can see last week it had that monster move here. It broke above that 27.75. It broke the downtrend line. If I draw a downtrend line here, we'll just take it from the highs. It broke that a while back, and now it's looking really good. So this has my attention. It's above. This is the 40-week moving average, so the same as the 200-day. It's way above that. So this looks to me like it might be emerging out of this bottoming pattern and starting a new uptrend. So this is an area that I really like. And kind of along the same lines is XLX. This is the steel ETF. There's some crossover in the names. This one's two biggest weightings, VALE and Rio Tinto make up about 20% of the iron ore companies. And then it has a lot of the, big steel companies here. But again, it's this similar looking chart. And I just feel like, this has not been something that's been working for a long time. You can see it made a high here in May of 2018, and then it's just been a steady downtrend. But it looks like it's changing character to me. So I think if that's the case, coming into next year, this is going to be somewhere to look for potential longs. So some of the individual names I like there, and some of these are setting up nice on the daily too. I'll just go through a couple quick here. U.S. Steel. You can see it's just below the 200-day, but it's showing signs of breaking out of this consolidation right here, which is just below this 200-day. So if it could break above 1450, U.S. Steel is looking really good. Middle Steel, this is the world's largest steel company, and it's moving quite nicely. I'd probably want to see it take out this current area. It'll be interesting to see if that acts as resistance. You can see it did back in July a couple times. So if it can take that out too, that'll be more of an indication that the trend is changing here. And then AKS and STLD are two other names. I actually own, these charts look really similar. I bought STLD and still own it on a break of this level here. Maybe it looks a little extended here. So if you don't own this and you like this name or these steel names, maybe look for a pullback here. That's what I'd be looking for, maybe into the $33 level or so. Or if you don't get a pullback, what I like to see is just maybe some kind of consolidation. And then when it starts moving out of that consolidation, that's where I'd look to get long. Again, because then you know where your stops would be underneath the consolidation level. So go ahead.
Nope. I wasn't going to say anything. I was just responding. To Stan mentioned that you weren't using a ton of TrendSpider features, but I think the way that you use TrendSpider is mostly creating these levels and putting alerts around them, using the volume by price anchored part of that. So was just responding there. But as Alex mentioned in the chat, everyone's going to use a different set of features, right? So it's always nice to kind of see how everyone uses them individually.
Yep. Oh, and I use an awful lot of them as well. I'll use the auto trend lines if I'm scanning through a bunch of stocks. That can come in handy, help me identify a trend line that maybe I wouldn't see right away. Sometimes I use the auto fib as well. that's kind of nice, especially if you're scanning through charts quickly. You can kind of see quickly, you know, if a stock's at a key level that might act as support or resistance. I don't use it enough, but the strategy tester on TrendSpider is fantastic. You can really customize it. You get really quick output, and that's something I think is really cool that I use quite a bit.
One thing that we do want to add to the strategy tester too that would be really interesting is the ability to actually backtest lines. So backtesting a horizontal line and saying, you know, what's the return after the price touches this after 5 candles or something like that. So
that'd be cool, like a retest of the breakout area.
Yeah, just or let's say that you're you know, maybe you're even trading on this SLX trend line, and you wanted to get an idea of what the average move down was before this breakout, because there were a few different trades you could have, you know, traded within, let's say, 10 to 15 cents around that line and made a couple decent trades. So being able to kind of back test an individual resistance level, whether that's horizontal or diagonal or whatever you'd like. So that's something that's definitely coming in the future as well.
Nice, that'd be neat. Silver and gold, you know, I like the longer term charts. Shorter term, to me, they're just kind of saying stay away and wait and see what happens. Some of the miners are looking stronger, GDX, silver miners. But I wanted to point out this level in silver because this is more of a big picture, longer term names I'm talking about here. So if silver retest this, you know, area under $15, you can see it was support here a couple times, big resistance there in February. If it gets down there, you know, to around $15 and starts showing signs it wants to bounce, I think it might make for a really nice entry to get in on what might be a, you know, a nice longer term uptrend. So just something to watch there in silver. Right now, I'm just watching it. No, it's not calling my name to jump in it right now, but something to watch.
When you trade metals, is it usually silver?
Gold. I more often, if metals are looking good, I like I'll trade GDX and sometimes GDXJ.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And those are actually, you know, looking a lot better than the metals. They have been for the last couple of weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how that relationship resolves.
Stan mentions this looks like a Bitcoin chart. You definitely have your spikes and everything, but silver does like to have its big moves up and down for sure.
It does. And if I go out here to the monthly, you can really see, you know, it's up almost $50. I mean, that's a long time ago. But I like the potential here. Again, you can see that level here on the monthly, this $15 level. If it now, who knows? It may not even come down there, but it's awfully close right now, close enough. But if it starts showing support here and moving higher, I think this one could really get moving.
Yeah, it seems that, what is that, the 200 it's holding, or is that the 40?
40? This is it's the 40. So I have that. This is typically on the weekly, so this is the 200 day. But yeah, it's 40 period.
Okay, so you still got it's got a little on the weekly still. Is there any? I'm just curious. Is there any reason you use the 40 versus the 50, or just preference?
So I use the 40 on the weekly chart just because it's the same as the 200 day.
Got it. Yeah, and there was a nice little uptick in volume there on silver too, so that may, you know, there may be a little bit of a follow through there. But if you look at the other times there was an uptick in red volume, you had a green day the next day. So these ones can definitely be interesting, especially over the weekend too, if you got some type of weird status quo change in the markets.
Yeah. Yeah, but pretty normal. Metals have had a really nice move throughout the summer, really into, you know, late summer, early fall. Not so much lately, but it just kind of looks like maybe a new uptrend forming, and they're just kind of giving it back here. But only time will tell, right? We won't be able to tell that until it starts reversing and making a higher low, if that's the case.
Yep. So we have a question. Do you ever use the raindrop charts?
Absolutely. I do. I'll use the raindrops a lot to look at some of the charts I went over earlier that are breaking out. I like to look of those in the raindrops. It kind of, if it shows if a lot of that volume is over the breakout area, it might give me a little bit more confidence to enter the trade, if I'm on the fence on it. But I do like the raindrop charts quite a bit. And they just look so cool, right? And they have valuable information.
Yep. No, it's definitely one of the more interesting things you'll see out there in fintech right now, just because it's just, people look at it and they're like, what is that?
Yeah.
We've definitely got a couple interesting questions like, what? So no, but I think it's something that sets us apart, and it really, over time, just testing it, it's really helped me kind of visualize some of those breakouts where volume is just completely aggregating above those important breakdown levels or breakout levels, and so that's how I use them a lot as well.
For sure. You can look at a daily raindrop chart and gather a lot of information. Whereas if you wanted to gather the same information, you'd have to look at, a 15-minute or 30-minute chart and try to, figure out what's going on. It's a really powerful visual.
Yep, for sure.
All right, couple more quick here. This is Brent crude oil chart. This is USO, the ETF. That not exactly the same, but they basically move the same way. But it's at an interesting spot here, right? We it's basically in this triangle, and we're just kind of waiting to see what happens. So these charts, the XMA, SLX, they're things that I'm not going to trade tomorrow, but these are some things that I'm looking at longer term, and this is definitely one of them. If oil starts moving up out of this consolidation or down, but I'm looking at it, from a taking long position standpoint, I think we could have a powerful move here. And besides entering the ETF or futures, a way that I would look to trade that is XOP, S&P Oil and Gas Exploration ETF. And this is the one I was talking about when, adjusting the chart here. If I use bottom indicators, and sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but I can tell you right here without the indicator, I'll pull it up, that this downward momentum is waning. So I'll pull up the relative strength, and you can kind of see it diverging. The price is making slightly lower lows. I guess it's kind of staying flat, but you can see the RSI here kind of turning up. And what's interesting here, if I pull up the monthly chart, there's this spot here. I'll highlight, around 2250 or so. That was an important low back here in 2009, 2016. Now it's below it, but it looks like it wants to turn up. This is the monthly chart. On the weekly chart, your momentum, your downward momentum is slowing. So if oil starts moving and this starts moving up, back above that 22, 23, which is up quite a ways from the current price, this is just something that I'm going to want to keep my eye on for next year. You can see, about a year ago, this was $44. It's been cut in half. This has been not a good place to have your money, to say the least. But if it starts turning around, in the coming months, this is something, you'll want to pay attention to. Not ready yet, but it has a lot of potential if it starts moving. Lastly, in the commodity space, and this is not ready yet either. This is DBA. This is agriculture fund. So this is pretty much a balanced mix that has sugar futures, cattle, coffee, corn, soybeans, cocoa, stuff you can eat. And again, this is not ready yet. I'd still consider it to be in a downtrend. But if it starts moving up, it hasn't made higher highs or higher lows yet, but it's made a pretty powerful move here this fall. So I'm going to keep an eye on this and see if it starts giving some back, if it can put in a meaningful higher low, which means the low price will be higher than, this low in September, and then start digging up. That would signal to me that this longer term trend might be ready to change. And if these commodities, this is the agriculture ETF, start moving, it might be a good place, to put some of my money as a kind of a longer term trade in a balanced mix of these futures contracts to capture that move. And then lastly, it kind of combines all of them. This is DBC Commodities. It looks a lot like that oil chart, doesn't it? Oil is the biggest weighting here in DBC, but it also has, it has a little bit of gold, copper, has a lot of its agriculture names. So again, just something I'm looking at if these commodities start moving next year. These are a few ways that I'm looking to play them. You can see here this downtrend line since April. That's one that you could look at to see if it could break above that. And horizontal level, I always trade off a horizontal level. If it starts breaking above 15, right here, the recent highs, 1580 or so, I might start nibbling here. Maybe stop below last week's lows. But again, this is just some longer term stuff looking at for next year. And DBC kind of combines some of the elements that we talked about in DBA, and it has oil and metals as well. So
definitely starting to coil, that's for sure. It
is.
For a while. Do you when you're looking to buy, you're always buying on the daily though, and you're just looking at kind of the weekly as the longer term view?
Yes, that's right. Yep. Especially when I review charts during the weekend, I'll look at both daily and weekly, but I look at a lot of weekly charts. And if I like how they look on the weekly, I'll see how they're looking on the daily. And then, like you said, Jake, I'll buy off the daily. Sometimes I'll even zoom it, to the hourly if I want to get really, specific about my entry price. But usually, stick to the daily charts for buying. And like I said, I like to buy before close. But with my work schedule, it's possible I miss some trades. But you get over that. Every trade is not the most important trade in the world. And a 0.5% here, 0.5% there isn't going to make that big a difference in the end.
Yep, makes sense. Any questions for Greg before I'm going to do a couple charts? We have a little time, but I don't want to keep everyone too long. But any questions right now for Greg? I think we had a couple in here in the questions tab. Oh, we already answered those. So Trader Isaac mentioned 4 charts on the screen if anyone else uses this. Greg, do you mostly just keep one chart open? You don't really kind of split the screen at all?
So I have a couple different views. I usually just have one open, and I definitely just wanted to have one open for tonight because it'd make it easier to view. But I like to have, if I'm scanning through, longer term charts, I'll do the 2 charts, one on top of the other, and I'll usually do one weekly and one daily. It's a nice quick look when you're scanning through names in an index or names on your watch list, just to kind of see if you get that alignment for the different time frames. But I like this view quite a bit.
Yep, makes sense. I like to use a split for daily versus weekly. It definitely kind of gives you 2 different views, but still gives you the same kind of overall story, but in a more granular way.
Yep, and it definitely saves time if you're looking for something like, oh, it looks really good on a daily, but then you can see it's approaching a big potential overhead or something on the weekly. You can just see it right away and pass on it.
Yep. So I don't know if we have any more questions. Doesn't look like it. We had someone mention CSCO, Costco, or no, is that CSCO? Yeah. Thoughts on that?
Cisco,
not Costco. Brain fart. Yeah, Cisco.
Here's the weekly. Nothing's wanting me to jump in and buy it tomorrow. I see this spot here around 41. Let's look at the daily. Yeah, daily. I just see right here a lot of resistance up around 46. I mean, it depends on your time frame. If you want to maybe capture a move here, if it starts digging in around 43, $44 and play it up for a couple bucks, that might be enticing. But I see a lot of resistance here. So just for me personally, that's not something that I want to get involved in right now. Just my opinion.
That makes complete sense. We have XLNX. We're gonna keep it kind of one request per person. Yeah, let's see. XLNX is it's looking interesting.
Here's the weekly. You can see it's kind of this area that it closed at last week. You can see it's, that's where it hesitated right there back in a year ago, and it broke through. So just looking at the weekly, I could see maybe being long above those lows from last week. Daily view. Yeah, I mean, I could see the support that's going to line up with that candle on the weekly view. You can see here is that going to support 80, 89.50, $90, kind of broke below it there. It's back above it. But what I'd be looking for here is some kind of upward catalyst. So I see where my stop would be, but I don't see any catalyst or anything to suggest that it's ready to move up right now. So once that would happen, for example, if it breaks above these highs from last week, that's 93.50. Maybe if it can break above that and start grinding up, and then for me, my time frame, my stop would be down there about $88. So I like to define risk at the stop. I just don't see the upward potential quite yet. But when it shows itself, it might look ready to trade here.
Makes sense. We have a couple more requests, but just questions in general. What patterns do you use, if any? I think you kind of mentioned this, but do you use any flags or anything like that, like bull flags?
Yep.
Kind of confirm?
For sure. So I'm always looking for some type of horizontal support or resistance level, regardless of what the pattern is called or what it may be. So like flags or something, if something's moving up and it's strong, I'm looking for that period for it to consolidate and then break out of that consolidation, because then I know where my stop's going to be. It's going to be, if it moves below that consolidation zone, then I don't want a part of it anymore. But you'll notice a lot of charts I post on here, and a lot of these that I went through are, just your standard breakout plays like we went through Goldman Sachs. So I'm just looking for areas where, price has respected it before. It's acted as resistance here in this case. So then when it breaks through, in theory, everything sounds great in theory, right? But, that should act as support going forward. But the great part is, if it doesn't, then you know exactly where to get out. No big deal, right? Getting stopped out of trades is something, you get used to it. It's not a big deal. You just got to make sure when you set your stops that you act on them. Also, the trade could turn ugly pretty quick, and that's what kills you. It's happened to me countless times. It'll probably happen again, but in time you just kind of get better, taking your losses and moving on. And then if it shows strength again, you shouldn't hesitate to get back in.
Yep. It's those are always the fun ones where you completely stop out and then you realize you were right. You were just kind of a little too early to the game, and so no, I completely get it.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter. It's just so hard sometimes to jump back in one that stopped you out. Yep. It shouldn't matter, but sometimes it's just harder. But again, I think that just the more you do it, the easier it gets. If you trade the charts, it's just a ticker symbol. It shouldn't matter, what happened to you in the past with that. If it's setting up again, you gotta pull the trigger.
Yep, exactly. Well, I will take over here for a quick second, just as we have a couple more minutes left, we will go over a quick roadmap as well. But can you see my screen now? Yes. All right. Just a couple things I was going to go over real quickly. Just looking at the broad market ETFs into next week. So we've been posting this chart over the last week or so, and we're getting close to the ascending wedge apex here. So kind of getting very close. And so one of the main things that I would be kind of looking for into next week is possibly testing this resistance if this momentum continues. And you'll notice here how we actually are only connecting this point to these two little points here. We have not actually retested this line in quite some time. However, if you create alert around this drawing with sensitivity, you'll see that we are able to capture those moves that did actually kind of reverse before we got to that line. And that's what's so powerful about these alert areas, is making that sensitivity whatever you want it to be. Some stocks are going to have a little more of a margin of error than others. But in this particular case, we've got to move the sensitivity over, about halfway so we can capture some of these moves that, topped out right before we got to that line. So for me, I would want to know anytime the daily price touches anywhere within this area, but I want to know anytime that 5-minute candle closes in that area in case I want to maybe, scale out. If I'm long, scale in. If I'm short, or not short, but if I'm buying on the support area. So those are kind of ways to really utilize, especially the alert system, or at least I'm using it into next week. So we'll just make this ascending wedge resistance, put it expiring in 10 days, and the alert's created. So now, if we do move pretty quickly to the upside, I'll be alerted and know, okay, it's time to look to see if this red line is going to break, or we do find resistance once again at this point. Another really important feature on TrendSpider is the ability to overlay these longer term time periods on a shorter term chart, so you don't have to split the screen as often, right? So instead of me having 3 screens split right now, I've got my weekly chart, and what I'm highlighting here on my weekly chart is anytime we've had a big move to the upside on the weekly candle, and we've got this type of candle that forms, notice here back in January, we were still kind of bottom feeding at that point. We had to move up. Then we had another kind of setup here. After a few weeks have passed, we've got this, I wouldn't call it a hanging man, but it's definitely showing sellers are in control intra-week. You've got to move down before moving up again. And this is what I'm really paying attention to here, is the fact that we are testing the top of the monthly Bollinger Band here. So the upper band here is highlighted. So rather than me having that monthly chart open, I can just simply overlay this band onto the weekly, and you can see how anytime the weekly candle's gotten anywhere near this area, we have had a pullback. That was in April. We really bounced hard, retested this area in July, pulled back hard for 2 weeks before bottoming out. And now we're kind of right at this same area after, literally that's 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 weeks in a row. We had a little bit of a pause here, but we are showing the same type of candle forming where we've got this long wick showing sellers in control intra-week. And we'll just see if this kind of starts to roll over, or we've got more of a, kind of a setup here where we just kind of test this area, consolidate, and move right back up to, continue the trend up. This is back in 2017. So there are times where you break out of this area, which we have very much so here. You have a little bit of a consolidation point and you continue to move up. So I wouldn't say this is completely bearish by any means. I definitely think it is interesting to note, though, how big this wick is. It may be an opportunity to kind of pick some more stuff up. As we mentioned before, the market is just so hot right now, and there's not a lot of other places to put your money, that it makes sense to kind of put it in the market. So typically this ascending wedge is going to be bearish short term, but back in 2017, back in 2015, these types of setups were breaking to the upside rather than the downside. So that's something that's worth watching on SPY. We'll go to the Qs here real quick. We've got the same type of setup here, this ascending wedge with, you know, I'm still trying to figure out what this wick was. Some platforms are catching it, some platforms aren't. But you can see, you know, there was some type of blip here that happened. Greg and I were mentioning this earlier, you know, what exactly, you know, this is, but this isn't something that's just on TrendSpider. This wick is showing up on other platforms as well. So, you know, it's interesting to see if this was just one big flush to make the move up, or this was kind of telling to show that there isn't a ton of demand below, and it was easy to kind of push price down very quickly. So same thing here. This is the Qs. We are testing that upper band again. We've got this really odd looking wick here on the weekly, and we'll just have to see what happens next week. One thing that I want to mention, and I've mentioned this a few times in other webinars, is I really like to look at XBI as kind of a leader. And this may seem kind of random, but it's just from experience that something I've really noticed is pretty a strong correlation. So back in December of 2018, XBI was the only candle that actually looked relatively good. Notice here, we had this pretty decent kind of hollow red doji here. All the rest of the indexes had a very ugly candle. So my point here is sometimes this can be kind of forthcoming and kind of show kind of where risk on, risk off is, and that can sometimes tell us where we are in the market. So what I'm going to do here is use the multi-time frame analysis again. I'm going to overlay that that weekly Bollinger Band, and you can see here this is the top of that band. This is the daily chart. Anytime that the price action has really popped out of this weekly band, we have had some type of little pullback. Now, notice here we had a pullback. You had a nice base form. You had a nice move up, and then you pulled back. But it is interesting to see that we have a couple gaps below. We are outside of this weekly Bollinger Band for quite some time, similar to this, and you know, we'll just have to see if this is meaningful or just kind of telling us that we're really showing some really strong momentum in the market, and this may just continue to push. So I really wanted to focus on the multi-time frame analysis in this particular webinar, but I did want to touch on what Greg was mentioning earlier with the anchored volume by price. Disney is something that I can use as a real-time case study. I used this setup here as a way to trade Disney about a week or two ago. And what I did was I used the volume by price, and what I did was I anchored it from this particular point here where we started really the move up on October 31st. And what you can see here is every time that we moved up, notice how we moved up, kind of consolidated before gapping up. Each time we had this move up in consolidation zone, you can see these little blips of volume here showing that there was kind of accumulation going on. Here you've got the next area. We had a gap up, had some consolidation. You can see that little shelf of volume there. And then we had our big move up. And notice now we're actually finding you know, quite a bit of support here. And the reason is because check out how much volume is holding in this range from October 31st. Most of this volume that has gone on has been focused here. So this is acting as a demand zone. Notice that there's not a ton of holders above. So if we did break out here, we know that any volume holding here is now in the profit. We know that at this point, most of this volume is kind of either holding at break even or you know, barely down or barely up. And so, you know, that kind of creates a lack of supply, because if everyone's kind of holding, waiting for a profit, supply drops, any type of demand comes in, it's going to drive the price up into this zone that there's not a ton of volume above. So that's how you can really utilize the anchored volume by price. I personally like to anchor it from these points that we really start the move up. GDX is another example here. You know, on the longer term side of things, if we turn on the weekly chart, and we anchor the volume by price from this previous area, we moved up, we pulled back, we bottomed out. So if I anchor it from this May 20th bottom here on the weekly, or the May 20th week, you can see here how a lot of this volume, same type of thing as Disney, a lot of this volume since May of 2019 is holding at the current prices. So everyone that is, all of this volume holding at this area, as I mentioned, is either slightly up, slightly down, or pretty much break even at this point. So as that supply dries up, it will be interesting to see if any, uptick in demand is going to send prices outside of this area into this less volume held area above. So just wanted to add a little bit to Greg's presentation. I know everyone has things to do tonight. It is Sunday. But if you guys want to see any other charts, I will try to look at those tonight on Twitter. I'll be posting a lot of different charts. So I'm sorry if we missed your chart request. We just don't have enough time at this point. Want to respect everyone's time and Greg's time as well. But thank you, everyone, for your time this Sunday. A big thank you to Greg as well. If you want to get 15% off up to 12 months, you can use GRG15. And make sure to check out Greg's website, gktrading.net. He does have a full-time job, so this is something he likes to do on his free time. And we really appreciate all the content you create, Greg. And once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks everybody for joining.
Hey, you're very welcome. Thank you again. We'll have you on hopefully in the first quarter of January 2020, maybe January, February timeframe. And we'd love to get your views as some time has passed and see how those charts are looking then.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
All righty. Well, everyone have a great night. Thank you so much for joining in. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out hello@trendspider.com, or you can reach out to us